Hello, Tyler Westcott. Thank you for letting me interview you regarding Erikson's psychosocial stages of development. The purpose of this interview is for you to demonstrate your understanding of the theory and how the theory applies to you and students you currently teach or plan to teach. Imagine I have never heard of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. Briefly explain salient features of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. What is the source of this information?
So Erik Erikson was a scholar that studied under Sigmund Freud for most of his life and is allegedly influenced by him. The psychosocial development theory has 8 different stages that you go through in chronological order, which is in the epigenetic principle. You have to go through one stage before you reach the next one. Mm-hmm. There's a critical issue that must be resolved in order to move on to the next. And it's an either-or issue. For example, the first psychosocial development stage is trust versus mistrust. And a lot of that has to do with the relationship you have with your parents or your primary caregiver at the time. Now, it's called a psychosocial development because it's talking about the individual versus how they view themselves in the world, the psychological needs of your own identity, as well as the conflicting needs of society. One good example of this is somebody is kind of reserved and they don't really try anything new. Then they don't really have this opportunity to get good at things, and that's in the stage of industry versus inferiority. If you never try anything new and you don't challenge yourself, then you may not develop any skills, and then you may develop this feeling of inferiority or being not as good as somebody else.
At what stage of development do you see yourself now, and why do you think so?
I would say at stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. In this stage, you've gone through the previous stage where you're coming up with your own self-identity. And I feel like I've, in large part, moved on past that stage because over the past 10 years of my life, I've had a lot of different life experiences and developed a lot of passions and strong convictions in my life, and a lot of self-reflection to develop, have an idea of who I am. And now I'm in the stage where I'm trying to find somebody to share that life with. And it turns out that I have found somebody that I want to share that life with. And she's sitting right next to me. One thing that stuck out to me in the text Educational Psychology by Robert Slavin is he talks about in this stage, when you find a partner, it enhances the identity of both partners without stifling the growth of either. And that kind of makes me think of finding a soulmate where you're supporting each other and trying to bring out the best in each other while not trying to make them feel inferior for things that they don't have not accomplished yet.
Explain how being at this stage of development may have influenced your behavior and outlook in your classroom. On what do you base this explanation?
One thing I think about is how we're always changing, and I like to think of a metaphor as us being a sculpture, and every choice that we make changes that sculpture a little bit, but there's no real end product. It's just this ongoing process. And I think a lot of my experiences, especially leading up to the stage 6, has made me realize that you are introduced to something new and it completely changes your outlook. And even in this stage, with meeting somebody that I've fallen deeply in love with, it really makes you, question, what you really value and what you really love, and like what are some things you need to work on some more? What are some things that you don't? Also, I think about trying to encourage that in my students to seek new challenges and also embrace the struggle that goes along with the change that's going to happen when you embrace these new things. And I think ultimately we need to know who we are before we can make any real informed decisions about what we want to do or who we want to be or how we want to make an impact on the world.
Identify at what level your students are or are likely to be at in Erikson's stages.
They're most definitely going to be at stage 4, industry versus inferiority. This stage has this increased importance on social relationships. These kids are going to grade school, and they're starting to develop like best friends, and also dealing with a lot of peer pressure and that sort of idea that they want to impress their friends. And then the industry versus inferiority has a lot to do with this just desire to be good at something and to have value and develop, the sense of pride and have others acknowledge them for that.
Explain how being at this stage of development may influence their behavior and outlook in your classroom. Oh, on what do you base this explanation?
I think in a negative sense, like I think a lot of, or even a positive sense, a lot of students demonstrate attention-seeking behavior at this stage in their life. They want to show you that they're good at something, and almost to a fault sometimes, where they're, maybe being rude or not being as respectful to other students. Also, on a similar note, they may give up easily on things or shy away from things that are hard, and gravitate towards things that are easy because they don't want to seem like a failure. And I think you see a lot of extremes because there's this really strong need to be good at something. You can see this really amazing pride in students. At the same time, when they fail, you can see this really intense embarrassment that may come out in a really like negative and harmful way sometimes. And this explanation is based on just observation that I made in the classroom, and you can really see this tangible feeling in these kids that they want to impress you and they want to be acknowledged for these things that they're working really hard on, and they want to be congratulated for really putting in the effort to accomplish something.
What might be some disconnects between you and your students, keeping the differences of the two stages in mind?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big one. Not even with trying to reconcile these two different developments, but just forgetting what it's like to be a child and be in the mind of a child. And for me specifically, in relation to where I'm at in my life and where my students would be, is not understanding why a child gets so upset at failing at something, or for something not going their way. Sometimes I can get really frustrated because I may not think it's not that big of a deal. Like, you can try again and it'll be okay. But for that child, it may just seem like their world is ending. So I think being empathetic to that and realizing that you need to be sensitive to these kinds of things because you don't want them to fall on the closer to the inferiority. Like, you want to be encouraging them so that they do develop this industry, and have confidence so that they can seek these new challenges and move on to the next stage where they're trying to find their own identity.
Excellent. Any final comments?
Yeah, just kind of like critique of the theory. Like, when I've heard about this theory before, and it just seems very simplistic. When you just talk about it's just this or that. Humans are so complex, and this may be one of the big issues that they have to resolve at this point in their life. But there's so many factors that are going to be influencing that I feel like it's hard to just think of it in a simplistic form like this. And also, in from the lens of the epigenetic principle, and like you have to go through this stage before you get onto that one. I think that's a little simplistic too, where there's going to be a lot of bleeding into each other, and also they may go through, maybe somebody has gotten really good at something, but they still have extreme trust issues until they find like a family or friends that are going to actually make them develop that trust. And I think there can be a little bit of moving around and like these stages being developed at different times in their life. But I do agree that if one of these stages, any of them, is not resolved, that it may not linger, that it may linger with you for the rest of your life. If you don't develop like trust or your own autonomy, then that's going to come out in a really negative way in your late in life. So it is important to recognize these stages so that you can understand where some of these negative issues or problems that you're experiencing may be coming from.
Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity.